Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see you here. And I know that this is an important topic, and also I would say sort of a dangerous topic, because I have adult children, and I assume everybody who is on here is either an adult child with a parent where there's some difficulty, or a parent of an adult child where there has been some difficulty. Nobody comes to this kind of conversation for fun, just because they think this would be a fun afternoon or a fun topic. However, there might be some therapists also on, because you work with parents of adult children. So I wanted to start by talking about some framing issues for this topic. And then I also wanted to say what I think is an adult. I've said this many times before, but I just wanted to remind us about the long dependency of the human childhood, and also about how long it takes to become an adult and what the component parts are. And then I want to talk about, and this is a conversational class, and so I'll be doing these kind of overview statements, and then you'll be conversing with me, and I'll be open for questions, and that's where things usually get nitty-gritty and a little bit more interesting. But in this beginning framing, I will be addressing primarily the baby boomer parents. In other words, because I'm a baby boomer parent, and because I work with so many boomer parents in therapy, and because I know that territory a little better than the next generation of parents, will be addressing particularly that generation, the baby boomer parents, because I feel like we did some things well, but we made a lot of mistakes, and I know these things intimately. But then there may be other parents online here who have fairly grown-up children but are not boomers. And so I don't want you to feel left out. Please, feel free to ask questions. And I think the boomers got a ball rolling, and some of that ball rolled the wrong way, or whatever the metaphor is going to be. It didn't work out the way we thought it would. So let me start first with what is an adult. And this is an awkward term, an adult child also. So gosh, there's a lot to say about this. And I'll remind you that I am a developmental psychologist by training. And I taught both adolescent and adult development at Bryn Mawr College for 10 years. And then I've gone on teaching and writing somewhat in this area. So I wrote a book called The Self-Esteem Trap: Raising Confident and Compassionate Kids in the Age of Self-Importance. And that came out, I think, in 2009, maybe. I can't remember these years so well now. The books came out. But that book, I was trying to enter into the conversation with the adult children I was seeing in therapy. And it ended up being a parenting book, because Little Brown bought the book and said, you can't just talk to the grown-up children, you have to talk to the parents too. So I have a lot of experience in developmental psychology, and a lot of information. So the key markers of adulthood traditionally have been that you could govern your own life. So that word is autonomy, that you could drive your own ship or whatever. You make decisions for yourself and understand how your decisions impacted your life, so that you would be self-governing. You could use the word sovereignty for that you have sovereignty, or that you have autonomy. The other marker for adult life would be that you could conduct your relationships, making decisions about those, and that you knew, let's say, the relational territory of life, that you understood give and take, that you understood how reciprocity, mutuality work, a little bit about what equality is, and cooperation, so as well as your own self-confidence and so on. So there were these two big areas that we would look at from the point of view of whether someone had reached adulthood, and that would be sovereignty for the self and also relationality, you could conduct your relationships. These two areas, sometimes they, would be connected to social initiations, like initiations into adulthood, like the bar mitzvah. That's just the beginning of that path towards adulthood, or confirmation in the Catholic Church. That human communities recognize that the idea of being self-governing starts around the age of about 13 or so, and then finishes somewhere in the 20s. It used to be 21. Now we know that the full development of the brain sort of finishes around 25. But 21 is a pretty good age to mark it anyway. So social conventions, laws, religions, mythologies, all recognize that there was a passage into adulthood that was marked by that individual breaking away from parents and becoming independent, because that individual could govern herself and conduct herself in relationships. In other words, it was safe to do that because the person had the capacities to do it. So whether you take 21 to be that age or 25, there are laws, there are regulations, and there are social conventions that mark that passage. Typically, that would be called an adult. And typically in the past, you really wouldn't even have a term like an adult child. In other words, people became adults, they left home, they were on their own. And sometimes there was community with the family, and sometimes if the family had a farm, they worked together. Sometimes if the family had a business, they worked together. And of course, if they were sharing a wealth, there might be arguments and so on. But there was just a sense that you're a child, you're an adolescent, then you're adult, boom, that's over. You're not actually around your parents much anymore, or you're independent of them, or you're relatively independent of them if you're working in their business. So all of these transitions from childhood to adulthood were pretty well demarcated until fairly recently, until the end of the 20th century. I think there are real advantages in that. I think there are advantages in having rituals, and there are also advantages in being very clear on a social level who is an adult and who is a child. I think we're a bit confused about that right now. So the other framing thing that I want to mention is something that I've done a podcast about. I've mentioned it in other of these classes, and I'm just going to use the term hostile dependency. So, when you're dependent on someone, and you can be dependent financially, emotionally, you can be dependent on them for resources, such as knowledge, for example, you don't generally, once you get to be in that range of self-sovereignty, you don't generally love it. If you are dependent on somebody else and you're an adult, and even if you're a teenager, actually, because you start to feel this autonomy thing, like I'm making my own decisions, you are not going to love that dependency. You're going to bite the hand that feeds you. And, you can see this in our friendships. If you have a friend that's financially dependent on you, they're generally not going to be very grateful. They're generally going to be biting you. And that's in the nature, again, of being human, because I don't want to go into because I've talked about it a lot. A lot of places it's got to do with envy and gratitude and a lot of those things. So now that we've brought our children home when they are adults, and sometimes we brought them home because they didn't have any other place to go, and sometimes even in the COVID virus, they're home because they didn't want to stay where they were, they couldn't stay where they were, or they're home because they want to be home, or they're home for whatever rationalization that might be offered. If they have passed that point of autonomy, where they recognize themselves as independent adults, and if they have particularly passed that age where society would recognize them, they are not going to be happy in that dependency situation. So that's just like number one. Don't count on people being grateful, happy, cooperative, and so on when they're in a dependency situation and they're adults. That's the nature of being human. Again, not an individual thing. It's very difficult even to be polite sometimes for those people that are staying at home with parents who are adults. And that has been traditionally the case. It's like the mother-in-law syndrome. You know, you have your mother-in-law move in and, you know, you can't get along with her because, you know, she acts like you're a child, or your mother moves in and she acts like you're a child. It used to be that the elders would move back, not that the parents would move back. The elders would move with their children. So there are some things in the nature of the idea of a child being dependent once the child is an adult that make it difficult for everybody all the time. And it's hard to transcend those things. And that's where real dialogue, you know, keeping a mindful gap, keeping inside of your own snow globe, knowing, you know, that the other person is not thinking and feeling what you're thinking and feeling. Those are skills that you can develop. And I've got a lot of information on the website. There are the ebooks, and we've been talking about this topic anyway in the course that's called Living Together Without Falling Apart. So I'm not going to go into real dialogue or the skills right now, just to say that there are skills and you need them. So there's one other thing about just being an adult, which is that all of us feel this. Once we become self-governing and we know that we're in our own snow globe where we're seeing and feeling things the way that we do, we want respect. We want respect simply because we are recognized as a self-governing unit, you might say. And so we have that degree of consciousness, and it's where we believe that we perceive things, we decide things, and we do them on our own. And so if it seems as though somebody else is perceiving, deciding, and managing, that irritates us. We don't like it, and we feel it's disrespectful. And again, I think that that's across cultures, across languages. I don't think that's particular to North America. So that's one side of the coin. That's the kind of adult-child side of the coin, a little framing. Now I'm going to frame a little bit of the parents' side. And again, I'm going to emphasize especially baby boomer parents, and you know, I'm happy to talk about other parents as well, but my generation. So you all who are baby boomers, you must recognize that we walked away from a lot of things as a generation. And one of those was institutionalized religion. And I think that walking away, maybe it was necessary because, you know, we disagreed and we couldn't be authentically a part of institutional religion if we fundamentally disagreed. However, we threw the baby out with the bathwater from the point of view of being parents to our children. One thing that the synagogue or the church or the spiritual group does is it holds and contains the whole family in a framework that allows for the growing up of the children to take place within a larger structure of authority than the individual parent. And so there, you know, in the religious situation, not just a spiritual context, but when religion is taken seriously, there's a community that confers authority. And the authority includes rules for living, you know, like the 10 Commandments or the Golden Rule or some kind of ethics or precepts that would indicate to children that living is a serious matter and it's not a matter of your individual feelings. There's a whole sort of framework around you that expects you to do various things in a disciplined and regular manner. And the parents don't have to hammer that into you because there's a whole community there set up just to do that. And of course, nothing humans do is ever perfect. It's just never perfect. So some things always go wrong in any situation you have human beings organized. But one thing that went right in that religious setting is that there was a community of elders, and those elders were actually advocating something that all parents want. They want their children to grow up in a way that actually allows them to feel gratitude, generosity, a capacity for give and take in the community at large, and also personal responsibility. So in order to do that whole thing, you first have to internalize a discipline that is based to some extent on rules, because you don't get a bigger picture when you're young. And then as you move along, that internalized discipline becomes what you could call your conscience, or some psychoanalysts call it the superego. And that gives you a view of yourself from a perspective that sort of looks down at your ego. It sort of says, no, you got to do this, even though you don't like doing this, because if you don't, God will, strike you with lightning, or not like you, or not love you, or whatever it is that you project out there as the authority. The authority actually is overseeing you in the beginning, and then you oversee yourself. So that aspect of gaining an internal authority, having a conscience that's related to a community and how to live in a community, was instantiated in religion. And it's not in politics, it's not in spiritual groups, it's not in other kinds of social environments. And even though it is to some extent in schools, schools were always assisted by these religious institutions that helped them contain and hold the child as the child was developing. So the baby boomers tended to throw that one away. And the other thing that we threw away, which I think was unintentional, but again, it's what happened, we really didn't respect our elders at the end of our adolescence. And so we walked away from the respect for the elders. So it was difficult then for us to teach our children how to respect elders. Many of them had even seen our attitudes towards our parents and understood the ways that we conflicted or even undermined our parents' authorities. We left behind a number of things that would have helped us a lot as parents, and we kind of set off on the road of parenting, I would say, with a little bit of we had a small sort of handbag of tools, but we'd left a lot of equipment behind. And what I think we had that other generations didn't have that was useful is that we had a desire to get to know our children as individuals. We had a desire, at least, to see them as sort of worthy of inquiry. Whereas, say, in my parents' generation, it was more like sit down and shut up. I mean, it wasn't that everybody did that all of the time, but there wasn't a great interest in getting to know what children thought or what children felt. Parents might be interested in that when those children became adults, but not when they were, 4 years old, or even 12 years old, or even 18 years old. So that sense of being interested in the individual, and also recognizing that, just because you gave birth to that child, that does not mean you know that person. That person, as growing and developing, becomes an individual in a cohort, in a time, and in a context that's very different from your own. And so, all of us reflect our cohort and our context a great deal. That's why we can even say baby boomers, and it means something. So, baby boomer parents began to recognize that this little being is not necessarily a mini me. This is an actual person who's different from me. And that was a good thing. And so I feel like what baby boomer parents have done well and different from earlier generations is get to know their children. I feel like where they haven't succeeded so well is on the issue of discipline and respect for elders. And now that we are elders, some of us are feeling that, I've heard many, many stories about, I see a lot of baby boomer parents in therapy. I see couples in therapy. I hear and see many stories about parents feeling the lack of gratitude from their children, and also their children's inability to care for them when they're ill or when they have needs or when they're failing. And the way that I look at this is that if the children have never learned those are skills. It's difficult to learn them when you're on the rush of early adulthood or even middle adulthood. So early adulthood, there's a rush to get out there and get your place in the world. Middle adulthood, you may have children, you may have a lot of responsibilities and obligations. At that point, it's unlikely that you're going to take a course in caring for elders. I mean, maybe for your profession, but not for your parents. And so it's a little hard for us boomer parents, because we look at our children and we think, they're not that interested in helping us or figuring out who we are or learning from their elders. That seems to be over, or that scenario seems to be finished. But if we think about it, well, we didn't teach our children those things. That's not what they know. They're often really very, very well educated. Many people's kids, I meet almost all the people that I meet who are young people. And this isn't just the people that I see in therapy, but people I meet in various organizations, Buddhist organizations, and so on. They're articulate. They're very smart. They're very creative. And they're very interested in actually helping in the world. And so you can see that they have been focused on in terms of their abilities. Now, not to every person, but in general, I feel that there are many very capable young people out there, but many of them have not actually gone through the sort of, let's say, basic training on taking care of an ailing parent or respecting a parent who has a different view. And, I look at it as that was something that boomer parents left behind. So naturally, they didn't teach their children that. So that brings us to the point where I'm going to open it up for questions. I hope that I haven't said too many controversial things. I'm always hopeful that adult people can get together and have dialogue. That doesn't mean they concur. It doesn't mean they get a resolution. It means that they can see, hear, and feel each other's perspective. That does not mean that you have to endorse, agree, compromise, or reach a resolution. It just means that you can actually speak for yourself in a way that is modest and that, gives the impression that you don't know everything in the world, and also listen to the other person in a way that's accurate, that you could check out, did I get it? And once those two positions are sketched out, there's a tremendous relief. And then you can take it from there. And, you may or may not be able to solve your problem, but you are at least actually in contact with each other in the areas of pain and difference and fear and so on. So I'm going to open it up now for questions and comments.
Got a note that Sherry wanted to speak.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Thank you. So thank you, Polly. I was a little late because one of my friends who's in the baby boomer age and I called me this morning and said, I'm having quite an issue with my adult son, and would you mind if I came over and took a walk, socially distanced walk with you and talk? And I said, oh, that'd be great, because I think I'm having a little issue with my one of my adult daughters. So we'll have a big chat, and we did. And I knew I was going to be on this call. I couldn't wait, really. My question is, what is the best way to handle an adult child in your view, Polly? And I so respect everything you stand for and represent, and all the training, your Saturday training and dialogue calls I've been on. What is the best way to handle a child who, who is critical of you? Or
Well, critical, judgmental. Is that, hello? Is
Yes.
Sherry on? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, the very first thing, I'm glad you're on the Saturday class, is to recognize that's in their own snow globe. It's not about you. That's their experience.
Right.
And you probably have a different experience of the very thing that they're criticizing.
Right.
So the first sort of step is to recognize there's a space between the two of you. And that space actually is the space of differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always say, when you're going to begin any kind of, you know, dialogue over something that is causing you pain, you have to lower the emotional threat level. And the first way you lower it is for yourself, is that you come to a way of speaking that, number one, increases your sense of equanimity, you know, your ability to be in contact with yourself. And you try it out, and it's got to be subjective. It's got to be sort of like, I had the impression when you said this and this that you were intending this and this, or, you know, I felt really hurt when you said I was an asshole, or something like, you know, I get afraid when you speak to me, you know, in this tone, because actually I stopped thinking if you're screaming at me, you know, or I don't even like the word screaming, because a lot of times that's subjective. You know, the person who is hearing it as screaming. The other person is just hearing it as making an emphasis. So it's more like, you know, when you speak to me in that tone, or the way I hear the volume of it, I stop thinking then. So you begin to speak in a subjective way, in a careful way, and you say, you know, what it is that your experience is. Now, if the other person is willing to actually, you know, check out, like if they're willing to do the mindful listening, where they stop and say, so this is what I'm understanding. So, you know, you speak in a chunk, then you stop, and they say, well, this is what I'm understanding you to say. Did I get it? And then you can, you know, say, no, you didn't get it. And they might listen again. And, you know, usually there's quite a lot of, you didn't get it. Then, you know, the other side has to be able to say, here's what it's like for me. So that back and forth is the best way to approach. I would say that's probably possible 20% of the time. Like 80% of the time, there's going to be so much hurt there, and there's going to be so much potential for humiliation and rage, that you might start out by writing a note in which you express your subjective experience. And I would not make it a tome. I would make it like a note that, you know, is saying, here's what it's like for me, and I'm really interested in what it's like for you. You know, I wonder if you would speak to me about it. So that's another possibility for communication, is a subjectively stated note, and then asking for either a time when you can talk or a note back. I would not do text. I would not do the electronic method, because it is too easily dismissed and the emotional tones are difficult. So let's say that none of those things are possible. There's not going to be any communication. Then I would say you have to negotiate some amount of space between the two of you, so that the chances of humiliation and rage are lowered as much as possible. And humiliation is when somebody feels that their social status has been lowered, and a rage is the response to that. And when people are just doing a cycle of rage and humiliation with each other, it'll destroy their relational bond. And I assume you don't want that to happen. So that's my overall sketch of it. Sherry, can you tell me anything more, or do you want to ask a more specific question?
I'm happy to say more. I'm leaving in a week to spend a month with one of my adult daughters, who's the mother of an 8-month-old baby. And I was there in the fall for 5 months, helping. And it's gone pretty well, but I always have some sort of anticipatory anxiety before I leave. Like now, your timing of the class couldn't have been more perfect. Because, and she admits that she's quite critical of me. She never was as a child, though. She was not a critical child. We were kind of like this. It's only since she's become, as she's gotten older, she's become more critical. I feel like a lot of it is actually a projection on her part.
Yeah, I would be pretty sure it is.
But I don't think I can say that, because then
No, you can't say that. No.
So I don't say that. I don't say that.
Right. No, no, you would not
don't.
say that.
I think it, but I don't say it. But
Right.
sometimes I'm just at a loss. I mean, she'll even say, I guess I'm being critical now, or I know I'm a critical daughter. She's grateful. She's very grateful for my help, and she is very loving and communicates how much she loves me. But there's just this sort of, like, I feel picked at a lot. Like there's just, your eyebrow isn't, what's wrong with your eyebrow today? FaceTime a lot, or you didn't get your lipstick on right. I mean, and there are things that I feel are fairly inconsequential things.
So, Sherry, the one thing that I would say to you is that it's very likely that she idealized you for too long.
Yes,
because
I agree.
Those kinds of feedbacks are about perfection.
Yes.
And, so she didn't realize that she couldn't perfect you, or that you weren't perfect. That sort of went on for too long. And so she's now in the disillusionment stage, which really should start happening around 11 or 12. And it should finish up with a complete feeling of disgust about one's parent by the time one leaves home. And then it starts building back from that to something that's a more reasonable human kind of thing. But if there is that complete sort of, disgust about one's parent at the time one leaves home, then the parent and that college-age child can't be friends. So too many baby boomer parents have wanted to be friends with their children, just as their children were leaving home. So it's like, what happens is that criticism aspect gradually gets humanized as you recognize that your parent can't possibly be this incredibly wonderful thing, because you're not either. And that the flaws are distributed all the way around. But if the idealization goes on for too long, then the idea that we're all sort of in a wonderful bubble of perfection goes on for too long, and then the criticism starts to, it comes in as kind of picayune. But I would say, if she's otherwise grateful and pretty loving, and if you can tolerate it, and you have friendships that can support you during the time of your being with your grandchild, that's probably good enough. You might write her a note. You might. I like this book by Nadia Spiegelman. I'm Supposed to Protect You from All That, which is about mothers and daughters. And you might ask or get her a copy of it or whatever. I wouldn't ask her to read it; that'd be too much. But like, give it to her as a gift and see if she would read it. So. It's like, I don't think the situation you're describing is horrible. I think it sounds like it's annoying, maybe disappointing, but the two of you might have had a symbiosis for too long.
We did.
And now, and now you need some space in there, and this is the way the space is coming.
And just about the time that she would have gone into disillusionment when she was leaving home, my late husband died. And she kind of prevented that from happening in a way. So
yeah. That sounds like that probably was one of the reasons, and then possibly also a little too much idealization going back and forth between the parent and the child, which is, again, the property of the baby boomer parent particularly.
Yes.
The baby boomer parent thought, oh, it's such a wonderful thing being, oh, wonderful child, oh, so wonderful, this and that. Whereas the generation before was like, geez, could somebody please come in here and take these children away from me? Like, I'd like my mother to come and take them for the weekend. The baby boomer parents are like, oh, the whole weekend I want to spend with my children. So it's a, there's a little bit, even from the beginning, is a little bit of sort of too much of these are totally wonderful beings. But anyway, that's the way it went for a lot of people. So thanks for your question, Sherry. Thank you. Lori, is there somebody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, there's a couple questions. So someone asked, while I have freely acknowledged making mistakes, but my son seems to need to pay me back passively for everything he thinks I did wrong. I've asked for a face-to-face chat, but he never has made time. What do I do? Okay,
so let me just say, I probably should have said this to Sherry too. The first thing is, don't take any of this personally. Just assume, it's like, just assume you're in your age cohort. A lot of things we're missing around respect for elders. Like, as parents, we didn't teach it. They didn't learn it. It ain't going to happen easily. So that's not personal. And it wasn't something you did wrong, and so now you have a critical child who also believes that, in this case, maybe he thinks he knows a lot of things much better than you do, or has a bigger picture of what works in the world, or whatever it is. I mean, my children offered so much criticism about everything from my finances to how I dress, my taste in music. I mean, it was really across the board. They had better ideas. So, if you first of all say, okay, this is what's happening and it's not personal. Secondly, it's going to take some time, in the sense that you're probably going to have to say, either write the note, file the complaint, do the thing of, this is not working for me, many times before there might be an opportunity or the desire on the part of your child to meet face to face about that. I mean, maybe you could share TED Talks, or, send videos back and forth to each other. I mean this literally. Sometimes that communicates. And eventually, if you do sit down and have the face-to-face, you really need the skills of real dialogue then. And those involve, speaking for yourself, listening mindfully, going back and forth. Sometimes it needs to be a facilitated conversation. You need to go to a facilitator or a therapist or whatever to have it, because you cannot manage it on your own. Other times you can just follow these things and do it on your own. But to get to a point where your son desires this might be a pretty long road. Now, do I think that there is a point that automatically delivers that desire, like the age of 55 or something, or after this person has had children, then this person will want to get to know you? I used to think that. I no longer think that. I've seen people hang on to these positions for pretty much their whole adult life. So I think a lot depends on circumstances that are somewhat beyond your control. But what you can do is that you can make your statement, you can file your complaint, you can write your note, you can put the word out, send the smoke signal. I want to talk about this. I feel hurt. I would like to get on a different page with you, but I don't, find that the way we typically talk or the way we're relating, that's not working for me. All subjective. And let the person know, and then wait and see how that goes. But don't take it so personally. Don't beat yourself up. So is there, I hope that's a good enough answer. Gives you some clues to, a way to think about it as a parent as well as some things that you can do. And Lori, was there another one?
Someone who asks, for those who don't have children, is the lack of interest in relationship from adult nephews and nieces, despite gift giving, showing up for important events, visits, etc., is that just to be expected?
It is the same problem that I mentioned at the beginning, the lack of schooling of that generation in the disciplines of, let's say, being in a family or being in a community. That requires, I think baby boomers maybe thought that if they just kind of held their children and made them feel good, that these things would naturally happen. Things like, respect and good manners and gratitude and thank you notes and so on. But they don't. Turns out that experiment has now been done. And now we know that those things have to be taught, and they have to be taught as discipline. They can't be taught as an elective. It's like a prerequisite. So you have to learn how to do these things, and the rules. I like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Living. His chapter on parenting is good, I think. And the 10 Commandments, pretty good. You should look at them. And the precepts, the Buddhist precepts, all of these rules involve how you treat your elders, and they involve it as an obligation, not as an elective. It's like, here you are, you're on earth. There are a lot of people taking care of you for a long time for you to get to the point where you can go out there by yourself. So you have to return some things because of all that care. And so, you didn't just show up here kind of fully formed like Athena from the forehead of Zeus or whatever. There was a lot going in. And so you have to put some stuff back out there for others. So, several generations now of children growing up haven't had that schooling. And I don't think it's going to drop in from the sky on them. I mean, I don't even know exactly how we might, sort of change the framework. When I wrote The Self-Esteem Trap, I was trying to offer some ideas about, talking to your children about being a member of a family, that, you gain membership in the family. You don't just drop in and you're a member. You have to do things to be a member of the family. And again, there's a lot that goes into that religion helped people with. And I think that it's very difficult for families even now to teach those kinds of disciplines and values all on their own. So yes, I would say I wouldn't expect the thank you notes. I wouldn't expect the gratitude, because I don't think that the generations have been schooled for it. So it's like, if you, for example, want to dance with somebody, if they've never learned how to dance at all, it's pretty awkward. But that's not their fault. They just never learned how to dance. And I think this is one of these areas where children growing up since the baby boomer generation have not learned how to do these things. And so, I don't know whether there's any chance that they will, but I think the recipients, the elders, need to recognize that it's not personal to you. It is because there's been a gap. And, and you might still want to give the gifts because maybe you enjoy giving the gifts, but you might not if you don't enjoy giving gifts without the thank you notes. So that's up to you.
So we have another person who's asking, do you think it's unrealistic to hope for a friendly connection with our kids? Mine are 27, daughter, and my son is 25. I've worked very hard to resist the pull to idealize them and our relationship. I feel a bit stuck vis-a-vis my daughter, who very, very rarely calls or texts. She's friendly when I call. I've had a very similar dynamic with my mother, and I feel I'm stuck in a lonely place between two generations. I have held back from requesting more frequent contact, sort of toughing it out. What do you think? And she adds also, I am a boomer, born in 1963.
So it's hard for me to say sort of without the very, very specifics of it. In general, I would say I would hope and keep open the door to friendship. I would think along the lines of today's, sort of maturity for launching into what I would call adult life is a little later than what it used to be. So some people would say it's 35, between say 28 and 35. So, you might hold off asking for that more friendly thing until about 35. You should always, though, let people know that you'd like something. Just don't expect that it's going to happen necessarily. But you can say to your daughters, I would like this. I'm here. I'm waiting for it, without saying you should do it or why didn't you do it or I expected you to do it. All of which really will instigate defensiveness. And then if it goes further, could move towards the sort of humiliation, rage thing. So there's that. And then there's just the maturing of your daughters. So if by 35, they don't seem to be confident in themselves enough to accept, a relationship with a flawed parent, then, you might at that point try going to therapy with that daughter. And if you feel that loneliness it really moves you before that time, then try it. See if your daughter would go with you. The part of the problem with any kind of friendship is that both people have to buy in. Both people have to want to have that friendship. It's like a relationship, any kind of partnership, both people have to buy in, and to end the partnership, only one person has to quit. So that's also true for friendship with your adult children. And then the other thing is that some children, as they are grown up and they become adults, some adults are very interested in their parents. They want to get to know their parents because it helps them get to know themselves. And others are not. Others are kind of like, well, that's not that interesting to me. So I wouldn't also assume that every one of your children, I guess you have two, is going to have the same degree of interest in a friendship. So those are the things that come to mind without my knowing more about, who the individuals are.
So there's someone is saying, asking as a therapist, many parents don't know what they did, and that is their crime, not knowing. Also, many 30-somethings who have parents tried to be perfect but ended up being invasive. That is how all the effort is perceived, and they shut them out. She also asked, why do you think millennials seem to cut off their parents instead of talking about things?
Well, I mean, the reason I think that they do is pretty much what everything I've been saying. They haven't had any training in respecting elders. They probably think that they know more than their elders. And they don't have that sense that generations really have to relate to each other. So those things I think are just kind of like in a general way absent. Not every, like there are cultural subgroups where that's different. And you do see then relating to elders. What you're saying, Gillian, about parents not knowing what they did wrong, honestly, I would love to retire altogether the idea that parents did something wrong that ended up with, adult children acting in a certain way. Number one, unless you did some really egregious thing, which I find the parents that I see in therapy, they were very involved, they were very committed, they did everything they knew how to do. You haven't really done anything wrong. It's like maybe as a generation, we made some mistakes of throwing out the baby with the bathwater and the religion thing. And maybe we didn't recognize that our disrespect for our elders was going to carry forth. And those are things that, like a generation, that's what we did. It's like peace, love, and rock and roll or whatever. Was that a mistake or was that just a generation? I think it was a generation. So I think unless you did something egregious, and if you do, if you have done that, you can always apologize for it. That's another great thing about being a human. Apologies work. And when they're done sensitively and you truly understand what the other person was harmed by, you can make a true apology. But other than that, I think basically it's best to assume that you were a parent in a particular generation and you didn't do it perfectly, but you were very involved. And, you know, you're going to continue to want that friendship. So I would prefer that parents feel like, you know, proud of the fact they have been involved and happy that the fact that they remain interested and not castigate themselves for things that wouldn't have been possible to know. So that's that. And then the thing about children being invasive, I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but I think I'm understanding that maybe you believe that millennials as parents are over-parenting. And I think there's a lot of research that would show that they're overly involved with too many particulars in their children's lives and don't allow the child enough room in which to really fail, make mistakes, have to repair their own mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, if you don't mean that, if you mean that millennials are invasive in terms of being hypercritical of their parents, then that's more or less the question I answered for Sherry anyway. It usually has to do with idealizing and a symbiosis that goes on too long, and then the hypercriticism of the parent is the way that the parent is just actually being seen as having a flaw here, having a flaw there, etc., which, you know, comes from the idealization.
I think what happens is that the millennials will get mad at their parents, but they won't tell the parent what they did wrong. And so what I mean about the crime is that the parents are like, well, we don't know what we did wrong. I haven't seen my daughter. It's not about me. I'm a therapist, so I hear this a lot. So someone will say, I haven't seen my grandkid in a year and a half, and my daughter won't talk to me, and she won't tell me what I did. But that's part of the crime, that they're supposed to know what they did. And they sort of, and the thing about being invasive is I might talk to a younger person, maybe in their 30s, and their parent, they considered it being invasive. Parent thought, I mean, I'm a parent of 2 teenagers and a 21-year-old, and I didn't really follow this, but we were told, know where your kids are, get on their Facebook, check their phone. Yeah. I don't have the energy to do that, but my generation was told to be very invasive, and if you weren't invasive and around them all the time, then you were a bad parent. And then the kids grow up and they're like, my mother wouldn't leave me alone. Like, right. But the parent thought she was doing everything right. So that's the disconnect of the 2 generations. Does that make sense?
I still stick with the idea that there wasn't any crime. I also think that it's difficult. It's just that it's difficult sometimes for the adult child to simply say, I just don't like you, mom, dad, so I don't want you to be with my child because I don't enjoy your company. Now that's often difficult to say because, thank goodness, that person feels a little ashamed of that. And the reason those feelings are there is because that differentiation hasn't worked well enough for that adult child to be able to say, that is my mother and my child's grandmother, and even if I don't like her music, her clothes, the way she talks, the way she eats, even if I don't like any of those things, she is the older generation and I want my child to know her. And so that adult child doesn't have enough differentiation to be able to tolerate her negative feelings in order for her child to relate to the parent. So, you know, it's not like there's a crime. It can be.
My mother might drive me nuts. I'm sorry to interrupt. My mother might drive me nuts, but she's my mother and I just deal, and that isn't there.
that is not there. And that was there for generations. It wasn't an elective that you went to see, you took your kids to see your mother, even if your mother drove you nuts. And there used to be a rule of thumb of don't spend more than 3 days. That was back in the 80s and the 90s. Therapists would say, you're going to visit your mother and your mother drives you nuts, 3 days. Because after 3 days, you will be totally nuts. But for 3 days, you can manage the internal feelings. You can be polite. You can negotiate the meals, and your kids get to know your parents. That degree of tolerance is not around now. And there haven't been crimes committed. It's just that the cohorts are different, and they're different based on these big deals. No understanding of the role of elders, no respect for that, and no kind of religious training in which there was a strong conscience about how you belong to a family and a community, and how your life is based on others' care. It's not your own. It's not just your life, but it's a life that comes about as many people contributing to it, and you owe something back. So those bits of, just say, education or training or whatever, they weren't around for these generations. So we can't hold them responsible for that. And we also can't take that so personally. That's what happened. And now we have to work with what we have and find a way to relate, and not take it also as some crime you've committed or some fault of your own. No, you were very involved as a parent, and you did everything that you knew how to do, and maybe you did more than anyone had done when you were growing up. So that's where I want to leave it, because I think we're at time. And if there are other questions, I'll answer them by email. And I think, Lori, you have a few announcements to make, and this is our last class in this series.
Yes, it is, and it will be available. The recording of this class will be available later this week if you missed something or you want to share it with someone. We have also our last class of Living Together Without Falling Apart, Remaining Curious, is on Saturday. That's at 11 o'clock, and that's in partnership with the Rowe Center. And then exciting classes coming up on the 23rd at 11, Real Dialogue for Opposing Sides, Ending Polarization, and that's part of the UN's 75th anniversary program. So we will have more details as they become available on Polly's website, Young-Eisendrath.com. And also, she just launched a new e-learning platform. So any of these classes are available on that platform, and I urge you to check it out at Young-Eisendrath.com. You can sign up to see Living Together Without Falling Apart or any of the other classes that you may have missed. So thank you all for coming today. These were great questions. We will follow up via email on the ones we didn't get to. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, but we'll be back in touch.
And I just want to add one thing before I say goodbye, is that there's a new course coming out. We're just working on it, but we've got the first 4 classes of it done. That's making deeper contact. And it's about expanding your skills and your abilities to deal with whatever life delivers to you. And that's being offered in a different kind of format on the e-learning platform. So, I hope that many of you can get involved in that too. There will be some Ask Me Anything sessions as a part of it. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing all of you again in various ways and in various places. Thank you.